Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Newsbreak Chats. I'm Camille Alamia, your host. We've now come to the end of another month, and it's time for us again to discuss the biggest issues this April. So napag-isipan namin na pag-usapan ang dalawang pinakamaiinit na balita ngayong buwan. Isa doon ang pagkalat at pagsimula ng community pantries and yung continuous militarization ng China sa West Philippine Sea. Joining us today is Rappler's news editor, Paterno S. Makel, and three of my co-reporters. Two of them are actually new. It's their first time this month to join Newsbreak Chat. So allow me to welcome them. Dwight De Leon, who covers local government units, and siya ang nakatutok dito sa community pantries. We also have Jairo Boledo, who covers the defense and the police beat. And of course, we also have Sofia Toma Cruz na for the past months dito sa Newsbreak Chats, kinukwentuhan niya tayo tungkol sa kanyang coverage sa pandemic. But this time, mostly it will be about her experience or expertise when it comes to foreign affairs. So let's first discuss community pantries. This is such a very simple parang concept. How or why does it work? And why has it resonated so much with Filipinos sa tingin ninyo?
Camille, I've told my friends this before, pero in my observation, community pantry is a buzzword, pero in a good way because it worked. Because honestly, the community pantries that have emerged in many parts of the Philippines are just charity drives. But the original concept was so unique, something that even relies on honesty, faith in humanity. Di ba nga yung original quote is magbigay ayon sa kakayahan, kumuha batay sa pangangailangan. But if you look at it now, community pantries nowadays are always manned. Hindi siya yung parang pwede mong iwanan, ganyan. Kasi when Patricia noon, the maginhawa woman, first conceptualized it, she just placed some food doon sa pantry, tapos aalis na siya, tapos bahala na yung mga tao na kumuha, hindi nga siya nakapack. But later on, we realized that it may be difficult to sustain, given that, especially when many less fortunate Filipinos are really desperate for supplemental aid. And you also have to consider na nasa pandemic tayo, where the threat of the virus is still there. So basically, a system also needs to be in place somehow. So for me, some pieces in the original concept are not evident now, and community pantries have become your standard charity drives. But Patricia noon again, who said that pagod na siya sa inaction, I think that's how our Rappler article before quoted her, inspired thousands of Filipinos to mount their own project to help our fellow countrymen. And that's beautiful and that's inspiring, even when community pantries were created due to the government's inability to address everything that needed to be addressed in this pandemic.
Anyone else who wants
Idagdag ko
to...
lang, yes, idagdag ko lang dun sa sinabi ni Dwight. Magandang tignan natin yung community pantries sa wider backdrop ng populism and authoritarianism under President Duterte. Bakit? Kasi ang mga populist leaders thrive on a sense of helplessness among people. Like they make people feel that they are helpless about a certain situation. For example, in the case of President Duterte, helpless against the drug problem, an imagined drug problem that people need to are helpless about, and therefore they would need some kind of messiah, some kind of leader to save them from this situation. So populist leaders thrive on this kind of helplessness and fear. And then suddenly community pantries come in. What do community pantries bring us? Community pantries bring us a sense of empowerment, a sense of hope, a sense of courage, that we can do things even without the help of that kind of messiah, that kind of populist leader, and that is a threat for the government because suddenly from being too reliant on the figure of President Duterte, whom they package as Tatay Digong, suddenly these children are able to act on their own, and that is a threat to the powers that be. So we can see how the government is reacting to the community pantries. They are trying to bureaucratize it. And then in his speech on Wednesday evening, President Duterte said something about mass gatherings and that mayors have the power to control these gatherings. Of course, he didn't directly attack community pantries, but we can see that President Duterte is he referring to community pantries here, and is he being threatened, feeling under siege yet again? And so I think that is one angle by which we can look at it: the populism and the context of populism and the spirit of empowerment that community pantries have brought about.
Na-mention mo nga 'no, yung threatened yung gobyerno, pero naiisip ko, bakit ang go-to or ang default reaction nila is red tagging? Bakit, bakit ito na lang, like for communist parties or for communist or ano yung mga communist groups, perceived communist supporters and even perceived critics. So Jairo, can you give us an idea, bakit nga ba parang ito ang default ano nila, default reaction, red tagging?
Isa sa mga factor na tinitingnan natin dyan, syempre, yung isa sa mga naunang organizers behind this community pantries. For example, yung mga naunang organizers ay miyembro or bahagi ng mga organizations, mga civic groups, at iba ay mga member din ng NDMOs. At itong mga progressive groups na ito, at itong mga grupo na ito, ay ito yung mga laging nire-red tag ng pamahalaan, lagi silang nililink doon sa mga rebel groups. That's why yun yung isa sa mga tinitingnan natin. Directly ay nire-red tag sila ng government because paniwala ng government, specifically nung Anti-Insurgency Task Force na NTF-ELCAC, na may connection sila sa community pantries. Isa nga sa mga sinabi dito ni Parlade, yung spokesperson ng NTF-ELCAC, kung mapapansin daw ay meron daw dollar accounts or meron daw parang magandang mechanism sa donation itong mga community pantries na ito, nakatulad daw o kapareha daw ng ginagawa ng mga NPA or ginagawa doon ng mga rebel groups, which is in fact ay directly wrong. At the same time, walang basis yung kanyang pang-red tag. Pangalawang tinitingnan natin, madali kasi for the government to red tag these people kasi it's the best way of the government to silence and to attack these people kasi alam naman natin hindi criminalize yung red tagging. So the only way to tarnish their reputation or bigyan ng hindi magandang mukha itong mga organizers na ito ay through red tagging, through linking them to rebel groups na wala naman talagang basis at all.
Jairo, ikaw nagko-cover ka ng police. Ano bang naging reaction ng police dito sa community pantries? Kasi nabasa ko kahapon yung story mo tungkol dun sa, actually for lack of better term, talagang nakakatawa yung ginawa ng police sa CDO. Pwede mo bang ikwento? Tsaka ano yung behind the scenes dun?
Ang nangyari kasi noon, I saw the tweet about the memorandum. And then, right after ko makita yun, pumunta agad ako doon sa police station. I mean, tumawag agad ako doon sa police station and I checked the header ng letter and it came from the provincial office or the Cagayan de Oro Provincial Police, the PRO Region 10. And then ang ginawa ko, tumawag agad ako doon. And then, hindi siya sumasagot kasi medyo gabi na, mga around 8 p.m. na yun. So, I called the Cagayan de Oro City Police kasi nakakuha ko ng tip from a reporter din na doon niya nakuha yon. And then, the exact same memo ay sinend sa kanya sa messenger. So, meron siyang evidences na ito talagang police na ito yung nag-send sa kanya. So, ako, syempre, hindi ko naman, kailangan kong gumawa ng way on my own. So, I asked him a copy and then sabi niya sa akin, Sir, totoo pong nag-exist yung memo na yan. We confirm that we follow the memo. However, we can't give you a copy. So, kindly call na lang daw yung regional. Pero hindi nga available yung regional. So, I asked him na, sir, ito po bang memo na ito yung pina-follow nyo? Oo daw. So I asked him about the specific and the controversial portion of the memo, which is yung planted beneficiary. So I asked him about it, and then he said na it's called planted because it is pre-designated, which means the police can designate their beneficiaries. And on that part, siguro usually wala namang, hindi ganun siya ka-ridiculous kasi marami naman talagang donation drives at mga relief operations sa pre-designated naman talaga yung beneficiaries. However, yung funny part about this is that kailangan i-post sa social media yung natanggap mong aid from these policemen. And when I asked them about it, they said that it's for documentation purposes only. And it's so ridiculous because, it's clearly a publicity stunt, a PR stunt for the police. At the same time, it is so unoriginal because from red tagging these pantries, kung babalikan natin yung timeline ng response nila in these pantries, they started out red tagging it. And then it seems that these police units are not coordinated to each other because the red tagging started with the NTF-LCAC. It actually came from a Facebook page, Peace Philippines, if I'm not mistaken, that was shared by the NTF-LCAC page, official page of the anti-insurgency agency. At the same time, the exact same post was shared by a lot of police units. On my count, parang around eight police units. Specifically, shinare ito ng QCPD. And after the backlash, the QCPD deleted the post or deleted the shared post, and then they issued an apology. And afterwards, biglang naglabas ng statement itong PNPs. They're supporting daw this pantries. At the same time, magkakandak daw sila investigation. And then now, a week after into the red tagging fiasco, after red tagging these organizers, ngayon meron na silang ganitong klase ng project where basically they're adapting it. And now, they're using it to as a publicity stunt. So basically, they're not just politicizing it, but basically riding on its popularity. So this is how the police reacted on it.
I think parang alam mo yun na if you can't beat them, well, they tried to beat them, but they can't. So why not just join them? Ganun ang naging peg nila. Kasi 'di ba,
Exactly.
nakakatawa kasi yung term mismo nakalagay sa memo planted, parang sana medyo pinag-isipan yung wording ano kasi alam naman nila ngayon there's no such thing as private documents, especially kung government offices ka. Sa'yo naman, Dwight, you're covering barangays and LGUs. How did they react to community pantries?
LGUs naman were mostly supportive of community pantries, especially right after the backlash from the public when community pantries were subjected to red baiting. I reached out last week to all 17 Metro Manila mayors or the Metro Manila LGUs, and 16 of them told me na hindi kailangan ng permit when you're going to operate a pantry. Kasi nga for a time, last week din, there was a back and forth between or among DILG undersecretaries kung kailangan bang mag-secure ng community pantry organizers ng permit before the barangay office. So some mayors said, they even pointed out that there's no need to bureaucratize the bayanihan spirit and hindi kailangan ng permit. But we had nga this unfortunate event sa Quezon City noong April 23 when the pantry of actress Angel Locsin resulted in overcrowding and later on the death of one of the people who lined up dun sa pila. Because of that, the QC government issued formal guidelines, no permit, sabi nila, but community pantry organizers must or are strongly encouraged to coordinate with the barangay to ensure na walang ma-violate na health protocols doon sa community pantry. Of course, there are reports of pantries being shut down because of health violations, which for me is an understandable move because again, we are in a pandemic. But we just have to remember, or barangays should just have to remember that they shouldn't be hostile at all when giving feedback to community pantries because after all, itong mga community pantries, ito naman ay kanilang inisyatibo. Ito ay parang in the spirit of volunteerism. So ayun, but meron tayong isang incident naman, ito sinulat ko kahapon, of a community pantry being shut down in Barangay Laging Handa, Quezon City, because the barangay wanted to centralize daw the process. centralized distribution sa isang area sa halip na hiwa-hiwalay yung mga community pantries doon sa barangay. They said, according to the community pantry organizer, ang reasoning daw behind this is to to centralize the process, tapos parang lahat sila isa lang yung pupuntahan. But the community pantry organizer said wala naman silang na-violate na health protocol, and yung formal guidelines ng Quezon City did not explicitly mention anything about barangays having the authority to decline the request of a community pantry organizer to set up her project. So I've talked to Mayor Joy Belmonte about this. Yesterday, she said she'll have a word with the barangay captain about this. And last night, she told me that yung dalawang sides, yung barangay tsaka yung community pantry organizers sa Laging Handa, they got together to discuss the respective issues. The kapitan daw apparently was getting complaints from some residents of early morning noise, and the homeowners association in that area were repeatedly against daw the pantry in its current location. So, ang sabi ni Mayor Joy, she admitted that the mistake of the barangay captain is nagsulat ito ng formal letter doon sa pantry organizer without dialogue or a proper explanation. So, according to Mayor Joy, she just got them to talk by sending a mediator, and the community pantry organizer daw agreed to move to another location near the area lang where it is located. I have yet to talk to the community pantry organizer again, but I have already reached out to her. So, but that really raises the point, dapat bang centralized or decentralized yung pantry? So I think that's one of the more important points moving forward, kasi itong sa Maginhawa, si yung pantry ni Patricia noon, they decentralized the pantry because they believe na it would result in less queues at hindi magkukumpol-kumpol yung mga tao. But then, let's put that on the record na si Patricia noon was constantly praising Mayor Joy Belmonte and the barangay officials for their help in the community pantry. So, if done right, pantries can really be a show of effective cooperation between LGUs and the civil society.
Yeah, I think you have to strike a healthy balance, kasi kaya nga nagkaroon ng community pantries in the first place because of the inefficiencies of the government. And then when you have the government trying to meddle or interfere, parang it doesn't look good.
Yes.
And especially for the people, yung sa mismong community na parang, 'di ba, ngayon na okay, mangingialam kayo, parang pwedeng ganun yung isang view. Pero on the other hand, yun nga, the restrictions when it comes to social distancing and health protocols. Dwight, another issue, you mentioned kanina si Angel Locsin, and yun nga, naging chance siya for pro-Duterte bloggers and the trolls to, alam mo yun, to hit the concept of community pantries. And of course, pati mismo si Angel Locsin, who's a known critic of the government. But sa tingin mo ba, these attacks, nagkaroon ba ng effect or nag-stick ba siya? Kasi ako, parang I don't think so, but I could be wrong because I'm not the one really closely monitoring this issue.
Yes, definitely para sa akin na. Kasi itong red baiting na nagaganap, it really creates, it really worries more people nag-organize ng sarili nilang community pantries. We already, even before nung issue ni Angel Locsin, there was this community pantry in Pandacan, Manila, if I remember correctly, na tinigil na lang nila yung operations nila kasi yun nga, pumunta daw yung police sa kanila, tapos gumawa daw ng konting background check. The police said na background check lang naman, voluntary lang din naman, but yun nga, natatakot na rin yung community pantry organizer because they gave their information and they gave it to the police. So yun, may ganong fear eh. Hindi natin maalis yun sa mga community pantry organizers na nasa-subject sa red baiting. And I also heard na some pantries had to siguro i-distribute na lang yung supply nila to other community pantries. Kasi nga, ayaw nilang, siguro nararamdaman nila na napag-iinitan sila or they're being subjected to red tagging or parang in-accuse sila of being tied to the communist propaganda. So overall, it really just creates a culture of fear that is never beneficial this time. Kasi tayo na nga lang yung magtutulungan tapos nadi-discourage pa itong ilang mga good Samaritans from helping because there are some state forces that uh, that create this culture, this atmosphere of fear.
Yeah. And actually, parang hindi mo rin naman mabiblame tong mga organizers kung matakot sila because it's not like we're living in a vacuum. Nakikita natin yung mga ibang nare-red tag na hindi naman community pantry organizers. Nakita natin yung effect sa kanila na yung iba nahaharas talaga, yung iba pa nga pinapatay, yung mga nare-red tag. So for Paterno, our news editor here, what do you think is this like the whole concept of community pantries amid the pandemic? What is this teaching Filipinos at this time?
On one hand, we are unfortunate to have this kind of inefficient government uh, during this pandemic. On the other hand, what this teaches us is we are not helpless. We can do something. And, the Filipino spirit, the Filipino bayanihan spirit, sometimes it sounds cliche. But when you see people like Ana Patricia Non doing their charitable works and starting a movement um, nationwide, I think that is a clear sign that there is hope. This is not, of course, an excuse for us to just accept uh, how government is. We have the right to demand even more. But this is a good start, and especially because we are a year away from the 2022 elections, the 2022 presidential elections, and this is a good start. This shows us what Filipinos can do together, and that Filipinos, when Filipinos come together, Filipinos can um, produce something good, something that even reached Timor Leste. It influenced other countries
Yeah.
across the globe. Just like, for example, in 1986, something similar happened. The EDSA People Power Revolution. Uh, it started in the Philippines, and people across the world were inspired. And so it's interesting that this is happening 1 year before the elections. And to answer your question very briefly, what can we learn here? We can learn that there is hope.
That's a very, positive outlook, which is good. Kasi actually, naisip ko rin, you mentioned kasi 1 year na lang, 2022 elections na. And maybe, naisip ko na that could be one of the reasons why the government is so threatened with all these community pantries. Because alam mo yon, yung synergy ng mga tao a year before the election.
And because, Camille, they are packaging the pandemic aid as something that really comes from their hearts. Just look at how the acronym of the cash aid, SAP.
Yep.
SAP Bongo. Are they planting things in the heads of people that um, you know the government is able to help the country very well in this time of pandemic, when in fact the government is the reason why the Philippines is still in this state right now.
I think just to add to what you're all saying, then, because we saw recently the US had elections last year, and the pandemic became a really big election issue. I mean, as expected, but at the same time, it really it some analysts say that it spelled the difference between victory and losing for former President Donald Trump. And so I think, we live in a world now that's so connected, and you look at the experiences of the experiences of other countries, and on one hand you can learn from them, on the other hand you can also miss out on lessons that you can apply here. But if we're talking about the synergy of people getting together and timely reminders about how important it is to have a competent um, competent officials in government. Parang the pandemic is definitely, if you're thinking about elections, no, the pandemic is a make or break issue, and I think, like Paterno mentioned, and everyone has mentioned so far, it's something that the government is highly aware of, and makes known in ways that, you know, we notice.
Yeah, and actually, kahapon din lumabas, di ba, yung memo ng PCOO, ng Presidential Communications Operations Office, na parang yung mga state media daw, they have to put into context na the Philippines, parang in the broader scheme of things, better pa rin. So, nandun na sa ganung messaging na parang, yeah, we're failing, pero hindi, bigger things, ano tayo, mas okay tayo. Which is somehow consistent to what they've been saying since last year, di ba? So, parang itong issue na to, this consumed our lives for the past week or so. Pero at the same time, actually even before this, meron na rin tayong isa pang kinakaharap na issue. And you, Sophia, know this very well. Ito yung sa West Philippine Sea. Kasi parang we decided to talk about this issue kasi parang on one hand, yung mga yung government agencies natin are so focused on trying to bureaucratize the community pantries, tapos to attack them, pero at the same time we have like a bigger problem in our waters. So can you, Sophia, can you like share with us what is the significance of this latest tension? Kasi ang context, di ba, lagi naman tayong may issue with China. Like, hindi naman sila umaalis or lagi silang nandyan. Pero, what's the difference now?
Right. Yeah, so like you mentioned, diba, may issue naman tayo with China to begin with because of the West Philippine Sea, and that's also what a lot of Filipinos, top of mind for a lot of Filipinos when you speak about China. But the recent issue about Chinese ships swarming Julian Felipe Reef is significant, I think, because up until this point, there hasn't been a lot of noise about the West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea issue, for that matter, over the last few months. And so, and even if there were similar Chinese activities in the West Philippine Sea that we saw happening last year, it didn't gain as much public pushback or momentum in terms of, let's say, the DFA or the Defense Department really speaking out and mounting this very public pushback against China's actions. And I think what's significant about that is it prompted other countries to speak up on the issue as well. Some things that are different this time around, I think, is that well, yun nga. One being that there's a very public pushback and a very consistent pushback on the part of at least the DFA, the DND, the AFP, and the task force even speaking out. After how many years we knew they existed, but they weren't really making a lot of noise. And at the same time, I think this is the first major or big incident that happened under a new U.S. Administration as well. I think you feel the difference of that this time around because they spoke up on the issue. We know that there have been several calls between U.S. and Philippine officials, whether it be Secretary Locsin and Secretary Blinken, or the defense secretaries and even the national security advisors of both countries. And so I think the significance of this incident is being felt in that though there's more pushback, not just in the Philippines but also internationally, and then at the same time, parang it's what should have been. I mentioned this to one of our other colleagues a few weeks ago. Parang what should have been turning points in the past, let's say, whether it be Chinese ships swarming other maritime features in the West Philippine Sea. Parang baka ito na yung, well, hopefully ito na yung turning point or the start of a turning point in our handling of the issue. But I'm also curious about what others think.
Yeah, Paterno, Jairo, since you covered the defense.
Sa akin, isa remarkable itong issue natin with the China recently because parang siya no? Parang nauulit daw yung incident with Mischief Reef in 1998 where China occupied the islands during the Asian financial crisis. So sabi ng mga expert ay parang the history repeats itself. But on the defense side, nakakatuwa on the other hand kasi nakikita na nga natin, tama yung sinabi ni Sofia kanina, nakikita natin yung pushback from the national defense this time. And yung National Task Force on the for the West Philippine Sea ay lately ay nagiging vocal sila about it. Kahapon nga, di ba, on April 26, the spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry said na the Philippines should stop our patrols in the West Philippine Sea because it causes tension in the waters. However, kahapon, surprisingly, biglang may world war ulit between the DND and the Chinese government. And the DND said that the China has no business to tell the Philippines what to do. So basically, maganda na nagiging vocal na sila. However, sana hindi lang natin to nakikita on the level of the Foreign Affairs or the National Security Advisor or the Defense Department, but rather on the Chief Executive. Kasi sabi nga ng mga expert, si Duterte pa rin or si President Duterte pa rin kasi yung architect ng ating foreign relations at the same time ng ating defense. So, kung ito ay nagre-reflect lang sa ating department levels, ay hindi siya enough kung hindi nagkakaroon ng condemnation on the top, which is Duterte himself.
Right, right. Paterno, I'm curious about what you think. Kasi na-cover mo since I think yung sa Scarborough Shoal pa eh.
Ako, dalawang bagay. Una, itong China. May pandemic na nga. Aba, ito pa rin yung inaatupag ng China. Mga scam ng dagat ng iba. So makikita natin dito, reflection ito ng klase ng positioning ng China. It shows us what kind of world power China wants to be. That even if there is a pandemic, they don't care. They will just get the sea for their own benefit. So that is the first dimension, what it says about China. Second dimension is what it says about the Philippines. This flare up in the West Philippine Sea, it's happening again in the time of the pandemic, and most especially as the Philippines is looking for more vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines. And now President Duterte is trying to put the West Philippine Sea issue in the context of vaccines. That, China has been so good to us. They donated vaccines to us. So, we should just stay quiet. So before, in previous years, he would say, we cannot beat China in a war, so we should just keep quiet. So that argument still remains. But now President Duterte has added another argument, and that is, China has been good to us. They donated vaccines to us. It was for free, and so, they are our friend. But one of the most respected defense journalists, Manny Mogato, pointed it out in a Facebook post earlier today that, it's easy to say that. It's easy for President Duterte to say that. But if we look at the numbers, only 1 million of the Sinovac vaccines, 1 million doses, came from China for free. And then in this post by Manny Mugato, we could see that the other Sinovac doses made available to the Philippines, 25 million doses. So we bought that with taxpayers' money. And the WHO, through the vaccine sharing facility, is giving also 44 million doses for free. So we can see how skewed, not skewed, how screwed up this kind of thinking of President Duterte is. That we don't owe China anything for the pandemic response. Well, thank you for the 1 million vaccines, but no thanks to the government that failed to actually process the other vaccines. Remember, they forgot about indemnification before, and then they rushed it. Those things. They considered it as uh, what, paperwork. But this government is just so busy with the military and the militarizing everything. They think that a lockdown can solve everything, and then guns can solve everything, but we need the paperwork, and they have nothing to show. So you know we uh, we thank China for the 1 million free Sinovac vaccines, but President Duterte should rethink uh, why we are here right now. It is not because of uh, just because of the virus. It is because of the inefficiency virus that has plagued the Philippines since 2016.
Actually, when you mentioned it, parang iniisip ko, it's actually bothersome na si Duterte is actually amplifying the Chinese narrative. Kasi it's not like, alam mo yun, yung narrative na yun yung pinupush out ng China to other countries. And for our chief executive to actually amplify it, it's dangerous. Kasi parang na-equate na yung pandemic sa West Philippine Sea. Now, we have to choose one over the other. Parang ganun yung labas sa mga tao. But it shouldn't be the case kasi 'di ba parang do we have to bow down to China for the vaccines? When you look at the bigger scheme of things, it's just 1 million lang naman pala. While we thank China for that because it's still free, hindi naman kabayaran dapat yung sovereignty ng bansa. Sophia, any other thoughts?
Yeah, no, just on the point about vaccines, then I think Paterna mentioned a lot, a lot of important points. And context really being key. That yes, it's very we. We're grateful, of course, for the 1 million vaccines that were free because that's still around 500,000 people who get to be protected, right? And 500,000 is a lot. Although at the same time, when we talk about context, nga, Sinovac is one vaccine, part of the country's vaccine portfolio. We have seven vaccine manufacturers that we are ordering from, and that doesn't include the COVAX facility led by the WHO, which Paterno also mentioned. We're supposed to get around vaccines for around 20% of our population for free too. Um, and so at the same time, parang and I mean, of course, China was an early player in the vaccine diplomacy issue, but that's not to discount, let's say, other countries from also helping. And I don't know, maybe in the future we'll see that it might even be bigger than what China gave us. Although, I mean, you can look at it as a competition or something like that. But then, we're talking about the here and now, right? But then when we talk about, let's say, a few months from now, and we look back at all the vaccines that will have been given to us and that we will have procured for ourselves, I think you'll be able to put that donation in better into its proper perspective. And like you all mentioned, no, parang vaccines are definitely not something that we exchange our rights for. And parang and at the end of the day, it's not something that we use to mask the lapses that have happened in our pandemic response. If we're so thankful for donations, it also speaks to not just the, let's say, the generosity of the country that's given it, but also the incompetence, like we mentioned, of our own government. Because um we talk about not having a lot of money, let's say, but there's also time, which is a huge precious resource when it comes to um procuring vaccines. And we it matters, for example, when you start putting in the orders, how fast you get the deals done. And you can argue all you want about there not being any budget, or they're not us not having enough money, and all those things compared to bigger countries that are richer. But small countries, other smaller countries, if you like to call them that, have managed to procure vaccines, have managed to get them earlier than the Philippines, have managed to distribute them better. And so when we start adding that layer of vaccines to, let's say, other issues like the West Philippine Sea, it's muddled, and the two issues are somewhat related, but at the same time, and not totally, that you can, um like we said, exchange, parang use one to excuse your behavior in another.
So we already discussed na parang bakit nga ba hindi pa na, I mean, nag-a-agree tayong lahat na okay, maganda na nagsasalita sa mga gantong levels sa foreign affairs, sa defense, pero yung presidente natin hindi pa rin nagsasalita. Or kung, I mean, kung nagsasalita man, it's like to defend what China's doing. So I just wanna know from your perspective, bakit ba ganito pa rin yung pag-iisip ni President Duterte, and how does this play into his China strategy?
Ako, for example, I'm also really curious to hear what you guys think. But then, it's something that I've been thinking about over the past few weeks. No, about parang, because I remember earlier in the year when a new U.S. administration came in, the Biden administration. Parang, what a former. What our former ambassador to Washington D.C. mentioned was that, when we talk about Duterte's China strategy, because I mean, it was also related to our ties to the US. Parang there's a lot of debate about whether or not, um, what he's done is deliberate, if it's landed us in a better position or not. But parang you can't deny that it has presented us opportunities. Yun lang. The question is, what? I mean, what kind of detriments has it brought to, let's say, our foreign policy, and things like that. But then, um I think, for example, I don't know, but I'm not sure, but for example, having your foreign secretary talk and having your defense secretary be very vocal about these issues is really important. And like we mentioned, we all want the president to speak up on it, but I'm not sure if it's part of their strategy, maybe, to leave it at that level, because the president, as we all know, we know where he stands with China, and we know he's the friendliest person to China. And so, um if it's part of maintaining that balance, I'm not sure. But I don't know, it could be one angle or one aspect of why he hasn't spoken up forcefully on the issue yet. Although I think it's interesting that he mentioned his red lines, yung about, not drilling for oil or other resources in the West Philippine Sea, and things like that we haven't heard in the past.
Camille, I agree with Sophia's points. I just like to add another dimension. Maybe we can reframe the question, instead of asking, what is Duterte's Philippine strategy? What about what is China's Philippine strategy? We love, of course, thinking about how the Philippines is dealing with China, what the Philippines needs from China. But we can also ask, what does China need from the Philippines? What does China need from Southeast Asia? China needs Southeast Asia so that it can cement its power even more, especially because it is challenging the US in the Indo-Pacific region. And so we can see that, you know, China would also do many things to please us, to please the Philippines. It's not just a one-way street. So I hope the government also realizes that China also needs Southeast Asia. And we can see in the recent article of our editor at large, Marites Vito, she was comparing how President Joko Widodo of Indonesia and President Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines are dealing with China. President Jokowi, he is taking a strong stance against China's territorial incursions in Indonesia, maritime incursions, sorry, in Indonesia. And President Duterte is, of course, being subservient. But guess what? According to this article, and I like this point, President Jokowi was also able to get millions of Sinovac vaccines from China, despite the strong stance of President Jokowi. And this is not about the South China Sea. The Indonesia-China issue is not about the South China Sea, and therefore they do not have any international court ruling as leverage. He just had his political will and his country's whatever the country's economy and whatever China can get from it. Now the Philippines has all these, and the Philippines has an international court ruling as leverage. I'm not sure why the president is not using it. And we're also always thinking of what we can get from China, but China wants to get a lot from us. We have to appreciate that also, so that we have a balanced view of the China Philippines dynamics.
While I agree with that, naisip ko rin, but somehow it's kind of different in a sense na yung China kasi, they have more resources. They can give more to us than we can give to them. Parang gano'n, na parang, and they can get more from us, I think, dun sa strategy nila. Kasi di ba sobrang laser focused sila sa strategy nila on growth, on expansion, on South China Sea. So in that sense, I feel like sobrang barya lang sa China yung ibibigay nila kumpara sa makukuha nila sa barya lang yung ibibigay nila sa atin kumpara sa makukuha nila from us. Do you get that?
Except that the Philippines is the oldest ally of the US in Asia. And the Philippines is also very precious to the US. And if Asia is going to be a battleground between the US and China, the Philippines occupies a very strategic role. And so, the US is head over heels in maintaining this kind of relationship with the Philippines. If China wants to challenge the US in the Indo-Pacific, then China needs to court one of the most precious assets in the US view.
Right.
Of course, we are not supposed to be an asset, but in the view of the US, we are an asset to them. And so China would need to get this. We are that precious gem. We are not just a gem, we are a country. But if we put ourselves in the shoes of these world powers, then we can see how they view us. I hope we get a better sense of how important we are. And so we have that leverage. We have that clear leverage.
This is more like an added question lang. I know we can't answer this, pero you mentioned meron na nga tayong leverage, di ba? Like our strategic location. We also have the Hague ruling. And at the same time, I think if you're a national politician, mas pakikinggan mo yung pulso ng taong bayan. And several surveys have already shown that Filipinos have like a generic or like don't really trust China. So parang kailan ba makikinig yung gobyerno sa atin? Parang ganun yung nangyayari. And I guess it's not for us to answer. It's like everyone's sentiment na, hay, kailan nga ba? But going back to the West Philippine Sea issue, kasi Sofia, ang dami ko rin nakakausap and litong-lito na sila, pati ako, kung ano na ba talaga ang stand ng government now. Kasi DFA, DND nagsasalita. So just give us a brief background. Ano na ba talaga? As of today. Kasi baka bukas or mamaya iba na naman.
Yeah, actually, what medyo consistent naman yung messaging if you look at the DFA and the DND and the AFP. We always mention that we always raise the Hague ruling for one. And at the same time, we always reinforce and assert na the Philippines enjoys sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea. We're protecting our sovereignty. Those Chinese incursions are violations of our sovereignty. And so, at least on the part of the DND and the DFA, the bureaucracy, it's consistent, I'd like to think, na parang, yun nga, the West Philippine Sea is ours. But I think that's what is so concerning for a lot of people, is that, you have your departments and your career officials talking about saying one message, but parang the message doesn't reach all the way to the top, which is Duterte. And so I think that's what is so confusing and concerning for a lot of people, myself included, or other people included, na parang, because the president, of course, like retired Supreme Court Justice Antonio Carpo, who was also one of the legal minds, of course, we know behind the Hague ruling. He says that's what is needed. You need a leader to lead the fight in defending the country's rights in the West Philippine Sea. Because if you're a country, oh, if you're anybody really, you look to the head, to the leader, to to see what the position of a country is in a certain issue. And so Carpio was saying that, right now when Duterte is talking, at the time it was silence, and now he's saying, his old arguments about we can't win a war against China and all these things. We should be thankful for vaccines. That's sending the wrong signals and mixed signals, because you have your defense and DFA officials saying one thing, but then the president sort of turning around and saying another thing.
Ako, if I may add,
Jairo, sige, go ahead. And also, before you answer, sabay ko na rin yung tanong ko specifically for you. How is the military, both active and retired, reacting to this issue? And do they also view like the same way na may kulang sa action when it comes to the government?
ayun. Dagdag ko lang kay Pia, no, consistent yung stance ng ating government, ng ating agencies, specifically yung Foreign Affairs and the DND. For example, the Defense Department and the National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea ay meron na silang interagency joint patrols kung saan kasali dito yung Coast Guard, yung BFAR, yung PNP, Maritime Group, and then yung AFP natin through the Philippine Navy. Sila consistent yung stance nila na sa ating yung Pilipinas, and then they've ordered the maritime patrols, the regular patrols, at yung pagbabantay doon sa island, pagbabantay doon sa mga areas, sa mga maritime features. And dagdag ko lang din na the military, specifically current AFP Chief of Staff General Cirilito Subihana, believes na sa atin talaga yun. At the same time, yung stance niya dito ay dapat mas maging aggressive tayo. Yun yung pagtingin niya dito, at magre-reflect ito dun sa stance niya at sa suggestion niya last press conference na dapat magtayo na rin tayo ng maritime features doon. Magtayo na rin tayo ng mga artificial islands o mga constructions natin doon sa maritime features natin, dahil sa atin naman talaga yun. So that's how the current military sees it. For example, Lorenzana is also a retired military general. So siya din ay nakikita din na dapat gawin na natin, dapat mas maging aggressive na tayo. Kasi aside from, getting our stance or getting our standing our ground on the West Philippine Sea through diplomatic policies, dapat naging aggressive na rin tayo. Dapat hindi tayo nagpapakita ng takot. Sabi nga ni retired Justice Carpio, actually agree siya doon sa suggestion ng military na magtayo na rin ng construction yung Philippines doon sa West Philippine Sea. Kasi ginagawa siya ng China. Kumbaga, itong China na to ay walang pinangahawakan. Kumbaga, let's put it this way, makapali yung mukha nila for like building in our own territory, building in our own exclusive economic zone. So what more? Tayo mismo may-ari nun. We won the Hague ruling favored us. At the same time, the own clause ay nakasaad doon sa atin talaga itong mga pag-aari na to. So that's how the military sees it. So ang kailangan lang gawin natin siguro dito ay Duterte should wake up, because basically he's sleeping on the issue. Siya lang kasi yung kailangan dito. Katulad nga ng paulit-ulit natin sinasabi, doon sa department levels ay vocal sila, pero kung natutulog pa rin si Duterte, walang mangyayari doon sa mga ginagawa natin. Kasi for the past years, meron naman tayong Hague ruling, pero ang kailangan niya lang ay reaffirm itong Hague ruling ito at gamitin to our side.
I also read merong statement, strongly worded statement, yung PMA alumni on the issue, blasting China for their militarization. Is this the first time that they did it? Or ganito ba ka first time na malakas yung pananalita nila against China?
Actually, remarkable ito kasi ito yung mga PMA alumni. Specifically, hindi lang sila PMA alumni, ito din yung para mga retired generals din. So, nakita natin din yung twist of events dito kasi after nag-resurface itong strong stance nitong mga alumni na ito, nag-resurface yung fake news di umano na meron daw Viber group yung mga retired generals na parang nag-uusap and parang nag-withdrawing support from Duterte. At makikita natin, although the AFP and the DND denied it, pero makikita natin na meron tong strong basis kasi makikita natin with this yung dissatisfaction ng nitong mga former PMAers na tinatawag, itong mga militaries na ito. At the same time, bukod doon sa PMA, makikita din natin yung pushback from the academe, the Ateneo specifically, and the De La Salle University has strong stance on this issue. So makikita natin hindi lang former military may pushback, multi-sectoral level na siya. Even the academicians who used to be like silent on these issues, meron na rin silang stance on this.
Actually, pati nga, di ba, yung business groups, meron pa sila, kinote pa nila si Deng Xiaoping of all people, di ba, na parang pang ano talaga, pang tira talaga sa China. So, I don't know, everyone's really speaking up. We're just waiting for the president to do so. But now, moving forward, Sophia, under Duterte, we have drifted away from the US, our traditional military ally, and into the arms of China. But now, with this current issue, ano na bang relationship ng Manila and Washington? Can you tell us more about it? And tuloy ba yung balikatan?
Yeah. Tuloy siya this year, which I think is significant din. Kasi, I mean, well, it comes on the heels of the VFA termination last year. Termination and then suspension and then just the extension of that suspension. So, the fact that it resumed this year, I think significant siya dahil, I mean, it's still a pandemic, and I think it's also a signal or a sign that ties are improving. And at the same time, the fact I think our ties with Washington are yun nga, on the rebound. Like but it's important, of course, that we keep rebuilding that, because the last 4 years or so, definitely it hit a low, especially with the VFA termination. And but now we see that yun nga, we are an important frontline state for the US, an important partner and ally in the region. Because, well, like Paterna mentioned, we're their oldest ally here in Asia. Also, the US is our treaty ally with the Mutual Defense Treaty, which, of course, the two countries commit to defend one another in case of an attack, including in the West Philippine Sea. And so it's definitely improving now, because the VFA negotiations are ongoing after being after it not happening for a long time. And at the same time, you see a lot more communication, or at least public communication, between key officials, like in the U.S. State Department and in the DFA, and like I mentioned earlier, between the national security advisors and between our defense officials. And I think that's like interesting to see, because let's say in the last US administration, there wasn't that sort of coordination, or that full on cooperation and coordination that you see happening between all the different agencies on both sides. And so I think just by that alone, at face value, you see that ties are definitely being strengthened again. And although a lot of people will argue na parang, of course, because we're so close to one another, you can never really truly like drift away from one another. But definitely, we're, I think, on becoming. I mean, the ties are definitely being strengthened again.
So now, we mentioned kanina, di ba, like si President Duterte, hina-highlight niya yung donation ng vaccines ng China. Yung US na traditional ally natin, ano bang mangyayari? Magdo-donate ba sila? Like, not just to the Philippines, but to other countries? Kasi so far, they haven't done it eh. So, where are we in that scheme?
Well, for one, may plans sila to donate. Blinken has mentioned it. Biden himself has mentioned it. But it's really just a matter of when. Like, when are other countries, not just the Philippines, going to receive more vaccines? Because majority of countries in the world parang still very limited their supply. From what we know of the discussions which our Ambassador Romualdez has shared so far, is that the US is looking at plans to perhaps donate some AstraZeneca doses that they've bought but haven't used, to other countries, including the Philippines. And we also know, for example, there are a lot of Filipino American groups who are trying to lobby for the earlier release of Moderna vaccines. And I think it's interesting din that the US appointed a I'm not sure what the exact term of the exact name of the name of the position is, but basically it's somebody to oversee the distribution of of vaccines in from the US to the world. And I remember, if it was, I'm not sure, I think it was Secretary Blinken who mentioned that the US definitely plans to be like a world leader in distributing vaccines. But yun nga, while the plans are there, everyone is really just asking when is that gonna happen.
Interesting. I didn't know about that. Na meron pala silang parang envoy to make
Mm.
sure, alam mo yun, to oversee the donation of vaccines to the outside world or to the outside US.
Oh.
Yeah. So, any other thoughts like about this issue about China about vaccines, Paterno?
I think we have to go full circle, and we are asking about the supplies of vaccines. So China, additional Sinovac vaccines from China arrived in the Philippines recently, but we know that many local government units have not been able to use it, and it reflects another dimension of the problem. So one problem is the supply, and another problem is the distribution, which I hope to be able to toss to Dwight now. I remember having edited a story of Dwight about uh, the LGUs that have not been able to distribute the Sinovac vaccines days after these vaccines arrived. So maybe, Dwight, you can tell us more about it so that we can tie things together.
Yes, I've talked to some LGUs yesterday and the other day, and most of them are expecting the another batch of Sinovac vaccines to arrive today. And that's, Thursday yung nag-arrive last week. So, Thursday nag-arrive from China. So, that's almost a week. And if you we'll compare it to the last time, noong first time na nagkaroon ng vaccine dito sa Pilipinas, February 28, a day later or 2 days later, nakarating na yung vaccine sa LGUs dito sa Metro Manila. So, Presidential spokesman Harry Roque said that paperwork issues stalled the process. Kaya hanggang ngayon, hindi pa rin nakarating yung bakuna sa mga LGUs. And it seemed like I'm not sure if DOH was trying to didn't know what to say, but back in Monday when I asked them kung ano yung nangyari, or when Rappler asked them kung ano yung nangyari, bakit hindi pa napapadala yung bakuna, they said that delivery was ongoing. So when I asked Manila LGU, they said hindi raw nila nakakausap yung DOH. So I'm not sure if there was some sort of miscommunication there, or talagang at that time hindi pa nade-deliver yung bakuna.
Which is kind of surprising kasi meron naman, I mean, di ba, meron nang nangyari before na dumating naman somehow mas mabilis sa LGU. So ano na naman to? It's not like it's totally new kasi nagawa naman. So does it show another layer of inefficiency? Ano to? National government or local government or both? Kasi there's no other word for that.
Yeah, that's something that we're not sure about. When I asked Sophia about it, kasi siya yung ating pandemic reporter, she said that it's part of some of the documents that FDA needed from the vaccine manufacturer. Pero when I asked it, when Paterno and I discussed it, it's sort of interesting na did the Philippine government not hindi ba nito nakita agad ng Philippine government? They don't anticipate it? Kasi before parang we didn't have those problems, and we had a period to prepare for the arrival of the new vaccines last week.
Correct. So parang it's another, I don't know, sobrang
Yeah.
all over inefficiency.
Or parang we talk a lot about, I mean, all these vaccines coming from different places. China, let's say, for one, or India even, which is really the main, parang what Secretary Locsin calls them is like a major pharmaceutical sorry, the phrase escapes me now, but they're a huge player in the vaccine distribution, because I think they're the largest manufacturer distributor, if I'm not mistaken, or one of the largest, if not the largest. And so we talk about all these vaccines coming from different places, but at the end of the day, when they arrive here, and the task is left to us to distribute and administer these shots. Parang, wala. At the end of the day, the buck ends with the government here still. And so when snafus happen or lapses happen, we only have ourselves to look at and blame, perhaps.
But I
Siguro,
guess, yeah.
idagdag ko lang, no, connected sa community pantries. Minsan naiisip ko, parang mas organized pa yung mga organizer ng community pantries kaysa sa
True.
mga nag-distribute ng bakuna sa Pilipinas. At kumpara rin dun sa mga nagtatanggol dapat sa karagatan natin sa yung ng West Philippine Sea, parang mas may puso pa yung mga nag-organize ng community pantry. Doon tayo babalik yung kaayusan at yung puso ng ordinaryong tao. Minsan mas efficient at mas mapagmahal pa sa bayan kaysa sa sariling pamahalaan.
Yeah, kasi wala kang iniisip na politika eh. Sorry ha, pero kasi magto-2022 elections na and we all live in a country where institutions are weak, so they always have to look after themselves, especially with the 2022 elections. Yon. So maraming salamat for sharing your expertise and your insights, and I hope our viewers and our listeners were able to learn a thing or two about the current situation and about, alam mo yon, sana may nakuha rin tayong lessons para hindi mawalan ng pag-asa. Kasi at the end of the day, kung nakita natin na may nangyayari sa community pantries, it's not too late for us to do something about it, especially with the coming elections. And that's it for our episode of Newsbreak Chats this month. Join us again next month for another round of discussion on the hottest topics of the month. Thank you very much.